This honestly speaking with Big Will. I'm Big Will, and today I want to talk to y'all a little bit just about fatherhood and my journey through it. So I've been a father my whole adult life. I had my son when I was 19 years old. I was in the military a little over 10 years, and man, it was an experience. That was my first time really kind of going through something like that with a woman, and me and this young lady obviously had interactions or whatnot, and she got pregnant, and when she was pregnant I was also on my way to Iraq for the first time in 98. So even though we weren't together, I was fully expecting to be a father when I got back. So when I got back from Iraq, she called me right after she had my son, like maybe 5 days later, and told me that he wasn't mine. So at first, there was a feeling of, relief, just being a 19-year-old. It's like, man, was I really ready for fatherhood? But as time went on, I would later learn that he was mine. I ended up getting served with child support papers about 10 months later. And, back then I was a different person. I wasn't the most mature. I had a lot of just anger issues. And, I was more hurt about, missing 10 months of my son's life and not really understanding the reason why. So when I got to court and the judge asked me, what kind of custody that I want, I told the judge I ain't want nothing to do with either one of them. I later grew to regret that, as I just realized that, listen, this child didn't ask to be here. You know what I mean? So, it's my obligation to take care of him and make sure, that he's all right. So, I tried to work through that, with his mom, but that just grew just more and more difficult. You know what I mean? She ended up marrying somebody when my son was 2, and me being in the military and kind of, being gone and, deploying and going to different duty stations, I did my best to, father from afar or from a distance. You know what I mean? Like, I made sure I got down there, as often as I could. I was buying, multiple plane tickets to make sure that, my son had a relationship with my family. But again, like, fatherhood is probably, the most fulfilling thing that, a man could ever do in his life, but it's not for the weak. You know what I mean? It's just not. It comes with a lot. And I just learned, through that experience that, man, it's difficult, as a man. You got to fight through so much sometimes, you know what I mean? And because society kind of conditions us to, put mothers on pedestals, for the most part, men aren't really considered equal parents. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're, with that woman. And, it could be a little frustrating, you know what I'm saying? Like, just as a man, I love my son, I love my children, more than anything. So to feel like, you're not an equal parent, or to feel like, you loving something and not really being considered, as much as the other person, it could be a little frustrating. You know what I mean? There's times where I wanted to give up. It's times where I just wanted to walk away and say, you got it. You know what I'm saying? But it's unfortunate that, women don't really prioritize the time with children as much as they prioritize the money. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, they'll go to court, put you on child support, to get financial assistance, but they don't think about, their child having a relationship with the father, right? And, that could be concerning, because at the end of the day, when that child turns 18 and that money runs out, that child is still left with a void because they don't have a relationship with the father. You know what I mean? So it's a lot that just men have to fight through sometimes, in order to be an active parent. And, I'm no different. You know what I mean? Like, I had to go through those things. I had a very, difficult time, trying to co-parent, with my son. And, later I had daughters, twin daughters. And, that situation was difficult as well. I was with somebody at the time that I really didn't like, you know what I mean? But she got pregnant. So it's like, what do? I felt like, she wanted to have an abortion, but I felt like, me leaving her while she was pregnant, like, what kind of man would I be to do that? And once I found out that I was having daughters, it was like, nah, you know what I mean? Like, you got to stick this through. So, I tried my best, man, to stick through that, but I was miserable. Trying to make a relationship work on top of trying to, be a parent. It was just a difficult thing. And so I ended up leaving when my daughters was 2. And, I've been in my children's life, you know what I mean? Like, from day one. With my daughters, I always tried to just be active. Their mom used to always try to push 50-50, 50-50, 50-50 in terms of time and responsibility. And I know at the time she was doing that because she felt like it would kind of impact or affect my personal life. But I didn't care about that. You know what I mean? I just cared about being a father that I needed to be for my children. And so I have my children all the time. Everybody who know me know that. Every time you saw me, you saw my twins. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I was on. That's all I cared about. But I think that, their mother just, became just increasingly difficult. You know what I mean? And it made it difficult for me to parent. You know what I'm saying? Like I had to kind of acquiesce because in the state of Georgia, I didn't have any rights to my children because when she conceived, she was still legally married. So that just made a lot of this more complicated. And, we both knew what was going on at the time. And, it really kind of gave her the upper hand, in this co-parenting situation. So, I kind of had to acquiesce, I had to, go along a lot of times with, what she wanted to do and how she felt and all that stuff, when it came to my kids. Fast forward to, me finding my wife. When I found my wife, I think that's when kind of everything just went haywire. You know what I mean? Like, at first I felt like, my children's mother would be cool as long as she felt like she was doing better than I was. You know what I mean? But once she saw that I was like happy and, doing things, buying a house, getting a car, my daughters love my wife, they have their own rooms. It's a lot of stuff that was going on in my life. I feel like, she became a little jealous of that. You know what I'm saying? I think in her mind, she should have been experiencing all these things. And so she started withholding my children. You know what I mean? She started keeping my kids from me. So on the days where, I was supposed to get them, she would, hold on to them. You know what I'm saying? And that led to, because we agreed that I would get them, 2 days, Tuesday and Thursday every week. And we would alternate weekends. So once she kept, for a spring break, because we had planned to take the girls to Florida for spring break, she kept them. And once she kept them, I stopped giving her the $500 a month that we agreed that I would give her. So essentially, she held on to the kids because I wasn't giving her $500 a month, and that led to me getting into the having to get a lawyer. I got a lawyer. I was the plaintiff. I was taking her to court for I wanted joint custody of my kids, and it just didn't go that way. Gwinnett isn't the most Black father friendly. You know what I mean? That experience was probably, the worst experience that I've ever had in my life. I had to sit there and listen to a woman lie about who I was as a father. And, as we got through that process, or as we were going through that process, things were happening. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ended up losing my job. Spent everything I had on lawyer fees. I probably spent about $54,000 just on lawyer fees alone. And meanwhile, my kids are in the middle of this, you know what I mean? And it's hard as a father to continue to take those hits, in court and all these other things and be, forget about those things when you're trying to parent, your children. And, it just became, increasingly just difficult. You know what I mean? And fast forward to, the ruling, the judge ruled in her favor, said that I had to pay her $1,500 a month, even with me being, a disabled veteran and, having lost my job. He said that he based my child support off my earning potential, whatever that is. And, that was a little disheartening for me. My children live 9 miles away from me. So, to have to pay that kind of money and, still try to, have these experiences with my children when they're with me, it just became difficult. And I realized then that this system, it's just a very unfair system. You know what I mean? And like I said, as a father, it's hard to navigate through that. You know what I mean? Like there's just so many emotions that, kind of take place, as you're being told that you're not an equal parent and you're having to give more money to someone who, just doesn't really need the money. They just trying to affect your life. You know what I'm saying? Like I could see if my children were struggling in some kind of way or if they needed things. But But that wasn't the case. And for me to be the plaintiff, it's not like she had to chase me down to put me on child support. It wasn't that at all. I took her to court because she was withholding my children. So, for me to be, for the judge to handle me that way, it was definitely disheartening. I feel like, it just wasn't fair. At the end of the day, I felt bad for my children because I had to see them less. And I know that all they wanted was, 50-50. They wanted to be able to spend half their time over here and half the time with their mom. And, they say that they're doing what's in the best interest of the children, but, that's just bullshit. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like it just all feels like a scam, like a money grab. You know what I mean? But of course, being who I am, I'm going to keep fighting for my rights as a father. I'm going to keep fighting for my children because I think I deserve to be in their life. And I think they deserve to have me as their dad. And, so I continued to fight, and it started wearing on my marriage. You know what I mean? Because I was putting so much towards this fight that it was taken away from my home. And my wife and I had just had a baby together, and that just became really difficult. For us. Just all around, financially, emotionally, it just was a lot. It was heavy on me, and my daughter ended up wanting to live with me because she said that, the environment at her mother's house was emotionally and mentally abusive. So, I told my daughter, she ain't had to go back. That's just me trying to protect my kids. And their mother called the police and said that I kidnapped my children. And the police came over, they talked to my daughter, and my daughter told them what was going on, so they didn't do anything. She later called the sheriff's office and had the sheriffs come to my house, and we ended up giving them the paperwork that we filed, which was an affidavit for custody election and a modification of custody. And so I'm trying to go about this, the right way. And we do that. And throughout this time, my daughter's mom is withholding her medication. She's trying to force in-person conversations. She pulled her out of class to talk to her in school about, what was going on. And she ended up not liking the conversation. So she took one of my daughter's pills and kind of threw it on a seat. And it's just like, man, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, this is the person that, like, this is what the judge is saying is in the best interest of my child. Like, that just didn't make sense. And so later she ended up giving my daughter her medication, but a couple months later she does it again. And this time she tells my daughter that she has to come into her house. And my daughter said she didn't feel safe coming into the house, but she said that's the only way she can get her medication. And it's midterms now. So I'm sitting in front of their house. My daughter tells me if she's not out in 15 minutes to call the police. She was in the house for about 40 minutes before I called the police. And when I called the police, they came to do a wellness check. And, my daughter came out, she was crying. She told me and told the police that when she got into the house, her mom had her medication in her hoodie sleeve. And, made a comment like, yeah, I'm gonna keep it here in case you tried to grab it and run. And it's just like, man, like what, like this is our child. You know what I mean? Like she gotta go through all this. You playing with her medication. Like that shit is, you know what I'm saying? Like that's just not, it's crazy. You know what I mean? So I ended up, calling the police. We got a police report, and, my daughter came back with me, obviously. And fast forward to my daughter having a performance. My daughter had a performance, at her school Wednesday through Friday. And, her mom didn't come. She told her mom she didn't want her mom to come. And so her mom didn't come to the first night, which was Wednesday. Her husband was there, and I guess his mom was there. But Thursday she did come. So, while we're in here, I see that she's there. I told my wife, like, hey, let's stand by the exit. So when my daughter comes, we can just leave. And as soon as my daughter came out, I could see a hand waving. So I looked, and they mom kind of just mouthing a bunch of stuff like, what the F y'all looking at, what the F y'all looking at kind of thing. And so my daughter went to go get her best friend. She came back, and now her mom is following her. And so as she's following her, she's still talking, and she's coming towards us. And she tried to give my daughter a hug. My daughter kind of pushed her off and was like, I don't want a hug. And mom was like, you gonna give me a hug kind of thing. And at this point, people are crowding around my baby. So, I have severe PTSD and anxiety just from going to Iraq 3 times. So as these people are crowding around my baby, my natural instinct is just to grab my baby and let's get out of here. So I tried to grab her, and her mom said that I pushed her, and she started talking, and kind of just went crazy after that. So we get to the parking lot. I'm in the car and I see a car kind of zoom in, and it was her mom's husband. And he runs over to the car and starts hitting the car. And at the time, my wife is telling me don't get out. So I didn't. But then he came back and started hitting the car again. So I get out to address him. And when I got out, my wife got out to tell me to get back in, and my daughter's mom attacked my wife. So at that point, I didn't know what was going on because I'm on the driver's side of the car. My baby is in the back seat. My daughters are there. We're at the school. And now, she initiated a fight. So I run over there because I heard my wife call my name. I run over there to help my wife. And I ended up leaving with a battery charge, right? So I'm telling you the story just to kind of get you to see, just what I've had to deal with in trying to be a father to my children. You know what I mean? And so now in trying to be a father for my children, I'm in the system now. You know what I mean? Like, and their mother was able to get a restraining order on me and add my daughter to the restraining order. She was able to manipulate the system to get my daughter back to her home. And it just was just an unfortunate situation. My daughter didn't want to be there, but at the time, I felt helpless as a father because it's like, man, I feel like I can't protect my family. You know what I mean? So now, things are kind of, gone out of whack. You know what I'm saying? And meanwhile, we still have this modification of custody and this affidavit for custody election pending. So I had to get another lawyer, and that was another $10,000. You know what I mean? So it's just more money, and the judge wasn't fair at all. You know what I mean? Like the judge, he wouldn't accept a certified police report, as he wouldn't take that into evidence. He said that it was hearsay. Typically, when you have a minor child, the age 14 and above, and they sign an affidavit for custody election, from my research, the judge pulls the minor child into his chambers with, both attorneys and tries to get down to, why does this child, feel this way? The judge said he wasn't doing that. So we were forced to put my child on the stand. And my child said then, I don't want to live with my mom. I want to live with my dad. And she said the reasons why. The judge actually berated my daughter. You know what I mean? Like my daughter had talked about the experience when she went to go get her medication. And the judge said to her, you told your dad to call the police on your mom? And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, like she didn't feel safe. Like what is she supposed to do? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, again, as a father, I can't protect my family. So it's like, what am I left to do? You know what I mean? Like I'm sitting up here and I'm watching my daughter be brave. I'm watching my daughter be strong. I'm watching her stand up for herself, and I can't protect her, man. So yeah, that's just a very just difficult thing. You know what I mean? Like to watch a kid go through that and just kind of feel helpless. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, man, like shortly before that, we had a hearing and my daughter snuck out of her mom's house because she wanted to be at the hearing. She said she wanted to talk to the judge herself, but the judge ended up canceling that day. So I had to deal with, she had to deal with her mom. She came to the house and I Ubered her back to her mom's house, but her mom was at the police station telling the police that I violated a restraining order. So I was picked up right before Father's Day and I had to go to jail. And it's just like, man, like, again, like all this is happening because I'm trying to be a father to my child. And it just feels unreal. You know what I mean? Like there's moments where you just want to say, man, fuck it all. You know what I mean? Like I still have a 4-year-old to think about who just saw her mom get attacked. I still got my wife to think about in all this. And it's like, man, they didn't deserve any of that. You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't ask for that. So as a man, what am I left to do? You know what I mean? Like it's affecting my mental health heavy. It's affecting my mental health. I'm on the edge. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's so many things I want to do, but yeah, it's just all, it's all because I wanted to be a father to my children. So the judge sends his ruling and ultimately says I got to pay her $20,000 by the end of the month. Mind you, I don't have a job. So where is this $20,000 supposed to come from? You know what I mean? Like I'm sharing my story with y'all so that, y'all could be more mindful of who you having children by, right? My hopes are that, as men, that you really take into consideration what you're doing before you lay down with a young lady, right? My story could be easily somebody else's story. You know what I mean? And meanwhile, there are kids that are tangled up in this situation. there's kids who really love their dad, right? Really love their dad. But unfortunately, are forced to be with their mom because it's what society, it's the image, it's the picture, it's the pedestal that, unfortunately, our society conditions us to put mothers on pedestals, you know what I'm saying? And it's cool, I get it. But but just like anything else in the world, you got bad mothers just like you have bad fathers. You know what I mean? So it shouldn't be, I don't feel like we should be necessarily penalized more. Like if our children want to live with the fathers, I think judges should take that into consideration. I think they should think more about the why, right? Because if we conditioning everybody to really put moms on a pedestal, but now these kids don't want to be with their moms, nobody wants to ask the question why. Nobody wants to get down to that. Like you'd rather talk about what I'm doing with my finances, with my family. It just seems so ridiculous to me. So the system is obviously broken, right? Now we're talking about 17-year-olds now who will be 18 in a few months and will have the autonomy to be able to decide, who they want to live with, right? So it's like, man, what's the purpose of having judges in these positions? I just don't get it. But again, as a man, these are the things you got to fight through, right? As a father, these are the things you got to fight through. I take accountability for dealing with that person. Right. It doesn't make what she's doing right. You know what I mean? But I can take accountability in dealing with that person because I shouldn't have dealt with that person. You know what I mean? Like I should have been more mindful, before deciding to sleep with this woman or deciding to be in a relationship with this woman. Like I should have thought that out more. So that was a me issue, but I tried to rectify that by being a great father to my children. And at the end of the day, some women just don't want that. Some women grow up in a very broken home. You know what I mean? Like some women grow up in a situation where they haven't seen what, it is to have a father in the house that they love and respect, right? Like, and if they don't have no examples of that, they're not gonna have any respect for you, as a father or as a man. So these are the things that, I feel like we all got to consider, we all got to think about. Because at the end of the day, man, there are children involved in this, right? That didn't ask to be here. That didn't ask for none of this. They just want to love both parents. So, that's a lot of my experience in fatherhood. I thank God for the opportunity to be able to be the father that I've always wanted to be to my baby. I've always had a very complicated relationship with God, right? Because, I grew up in such an abusive environment and I lost both my parents, about 15 years ago. So I really had to navigate through life alone. And I used to just always ask, like, why? You know what I mean? Like, if there's a God, why am I going through this? And I remember my brother told me one time, shout out to Willie, my brother, man, I love you. Why not you? You know what I'm saying? Like, why not you? And that really stuck with me because I feel like a number of things. I feel like finding my wife and having my baby, those two things alone made me believe in God. You know what I mean? Like for my wife to bring me so much peace and for my baby to bring me so much joy through all this stuff that's going on. Like that's the blessing. That's the blessing. And then the other part of this blessing is, man, I get to share this with y'all. I get to help somebody out there by just sharing my story. So hopefully, there's a young man, that watches this and says, man, you know what, man, bro was talking. You know what I'm saying? Because of this conversation, man, I need to think a little bit more before, having unprotected sex or even laying with the person. I need to think more before I even get to a point where I want to lay with this person. You know what I mean? Like, that's my hopes. Those are my hopes. That's what I want to do. I want to be able to share my experiences with y'all in hopes that, man, it can help somebody out there because I'm not the only person that, is going through this kind of stuff. So we all got to help each other, man. We all got to figure out how to navigate through this. And I hope there's a woman out here that looks at this and says, man, there's really some solid men out here. There's really men out here who care about being a father. I hope that there's a woman that looks at this and says, man, I don't want to be like that mom. I don't want my kids to feel about me the way my children feel about theirs. You understand? Like I hope that there's a woman out here that's watching this and that takes the time to say, man, bro, like, yeah, I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Because is that really loving your children? I think it's selfish, honestly. You know what I mean? Like I think there's a misconception that all mothers are great. You know what I mean? And all mothers love their children. I just don't believe that. That hasn't been my experience. You know what I mean? I think so. I think there's a lot of mothers out there that care about themselves more than they care about their children. I think it's a lot of mothers out there that are jealous of the relationship that their children have with their fathers, because the children have better relationships with their fathers than they had with their fathers. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. So we just got to be honest about that. You know what I mean? Be honest about that. And we got to make better decisions. Simple as that. We just got to make better decisions, better choices. You know, as men, we got to make better choices. As women, we got to make better choices. Are there some terrible fathers out there? Man, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. So my hopes are that, you know, some of those men could see this and hopefully be inspired enough to be active in their kids' lives. Because at the end of the day, man, our children are blessings. They're blessings. At the end of the day, they are blessings, man. They didn't ask to be here, and we're responsible for making sure that they are productive people in society and not causing more trauma to their lives that they have to overcome. Right? I'm very transparent with my children. I talk to my children about everything because they need to know. They need to know who their dad is. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they need to know, you know, what it feels like to be loved unconditionally by somebody, man. I've literally went through the worst time of my life these last 4 years, fighting for my children, being told by a judge that I'm not even considered half the parent. But it's the stuff that we got to go through. It come with the territory. And again, I take accountability for dealing with that person. I take accountability for that. But at the same time, man, listen, you know, we all should, you know, try to be better people every day. You know what I mean? We all should be actively trying to be better every day. And that's what I focus on. I focus on, you know, trying to inspire, trying to help others, man, trying to, you know, be a father figure, a role model to, you know, the kids that are around me, the people that are around me. You know what I'm saying? I feel like, again, I'm not a super religious person, but I really feel like that's why God is taking me through these things. He's taking me through these things so that I can be able to share my experiences with other people, man, and have a testimony, right? Like that's really what this is about. So yeah, man, listen, life ain't always easy. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. You know what I mean? But you got to roll with the punches. You got to roll with the punches, man. Don't let that deter you from being a great person. You feel me? All right, man, I'll get out of here, man. Listen, I love y'all. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, comment, share. Man, all feedback is welcomed. And man, thank y'all for supporting me. And I love y'all, man. I swear I do.
Last time that I checked, it was 5 chains on my neck. It was no smut on my rap last time that I checked.